The ICI construction market in Ontario is growing, but not without its challenges. Despite economic uncertainty, shifting trade policies, and the threat of tariffs, there are still areas of strength and opportunity in this sector. So where should contractors, workers, and industry leaders be focusing their attention? In this episode of OCS Talks, we break down BuildForce Canada's latest construction forecast for Ontario and what it means for the unionized ICI construction industry. From where growth is expected to continue, to what risks lie ahead, and how the workforce can adapt, we're diving into key takeaways that can help guide your business decisions.
Welcome to OCS Talks, your source for all things related to Ontario's unionized ICI construction sector.
I'm Barron, CEO of the Ontario Construction Secretariat, and joining me are Bill Ferreira and Bob Collins of BuildForce Canada, longtime partners in helping us analyze and understand labor market landscape and construction. Let's get into it. Thank you for joining us, Bill and Bob. Bill, we'll start with you. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for the invite. Again, we've appreciated this relationship. It's a long-standing relationship we've had with the OCS, and we appreciate being on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you. And Bob, so nice to see you again. How are you?
Not too bad. Good to see you. Always an interesting times these days doing forecasting, but there we go.
I can only imagine. So I guess in the end of it here, we're all pretty familiar with the uncertainty in the economy right now with respect to political decisions south of the border and really the ongoing threats. But I think it's important to look at the bigger picture and talk about how all of this will affect the ICI construction market as a whole. So in your forecast and in our recent State of the Industry and Outlook conference, you spoke about still seeing growth despite the commentary around tariffs. So I want to start with where kind of we see some of those strengths in the ICI sector. So Bob, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. Thanks, Brian. And maybe I'll step back just a little bit to sort of put a context in place. You know, coming out of the pandemic, let's say, Ontario is one of the strongest construction markets in Canada. You know, first it was residential construction driving strong growth, and then non-residential construction joined the party. We saw, 11 to 12% growth in employment and labor force. We saw record levels of unemployment rates. But then things started to slow a little bit in 2024, primarily on the residential side, while non-residential continued to sort of step along. And, one of the things that we see here, we're not expecting any significant growth on the residential side to probably 2026, but we're expecting the non-residential side to sort of keep pace, more moderate relative to growth over the last few years. But we're tracking a lot of activity in the non-residential construction, which we think will help sustain levels of activity across the various market segments. And one of the things that's probably unique for the BuildForce analysis, we have macroeconomic models that pick up, overall trend growth, but we track major projects. And in Ontario, unique to over the last couple of years, we're looking at, close to $200 billion of projects that are underway and proposed. And just to give you a sort of sense as to what some of the key drivers are, maybe I'll just run through some of those numbers just to put things in a little bit of context, and then finish off with where we believe the strength will remain. In transit systems, and that falls under what we call engineering construction, we're tracking around $38 billion of projects. A lot of that is in the GTA, Central and Eastern Ontario regions. Power generation, nuclear refurbishments in the Greater Toronto Area and Southwest, small modular reactor in the GTA, and transmission projects, North and Southwest regions. Healthcare, another big one, tracking about $30 billion of projects. And that's literally across the province. You'll see small and medium and large hospital projects right across the province. You've got other institutional building, probably a little more concentrated in Eastern Ontario, and that's renovations and new combined. On the industrial building side, we saw a fair bit of activity over the last few years, driven by auto retooling and the EV battery facilities, particularly in the Southwest, but some projects proposed and underway in the Central and GTA. Mining projects in the north have retreated somewhat, but still a fair amount of activity in that particular market segment. And then, of course, the last piece of the puzzle will be, water, wastewater, road projects add to the opportunities across the province. So as you can see, there's a fair amount of current and proposed projects that will help sustain. Now, that's not to say without the risks. So let's just dig a little bit into what I'll call the ICI construction, which is the industrial, commercial, and institutional end of the equation. Industrial, I mentioned about the auto retooling and EV projects that have been driving over the last few years. There's still a fair number of large-scale projects that are planned. Some may have started. There are some risks there, obviously, under the current economic climate, and we'll have to carefully track these projects in terms of how they'll proceed over the next few years. But there are risks there, obviously. Commercial was a bit slower coming out of the pandemic. Took a little while for that one to pick up. We're seeing much more moderate growth again. There are some risks there. Should there be more of a stepping down of the economic growth, that could translate into business decisions in terms of commercial activity. So the real key here has been on the healthcare side, because that's where a lot of the growth has been. It's been growing since probably probably around 2016, 2017, that's been on the rise on the healthcare side. And those projects, many are underway and several proposed again across the province. So that's a real growth opportunity that we suspect will help sustain levels of activity and employment opportunities. Moving over to another component, what we call engineering construction, as I mentioned about the transit systems, a lot of spending there. Again, a little bit more concentrated in the Greater Toronto area, but there's spillover effect that will carry into the ICI construction activity in that particular market. And then, of course, we have the power generation, as I mentioned, the nuclear refurbishment. So in terms of markets where there should be sustained levels of activity and stronger opportunities. Clearly, the healthcare is one that's sort of stepping up as we're tracking. We will look closely to see whether there's been any changes to start date and end dates, but there's a fair number of projects that are already underway. And then on the transit systems, another big driver that will continue on. Again, long list of projects that are already underway and proposed. And then the last piece, probably on the power generation, would be, there's spillover effects again to the ICI side. So we see a lot of these being important drivers, 25, 26, 27. Right now, for Ontario, coming out of last year with our review of the market conditions, we see more moderate growth relative to the last few years, but continue to step up more moderately to 2027, and then sustained literally to 2029 under the current environment of what the projects we have proposed. So that's where we're seeing the construction market right now. Obviously, there are some risks in 2025 that may impact some of the start points of these projects. But given the infrastructure needs and population growth that the economy is catching up to, these projects are likely to proceed. We may just be looking at some changes in terms of the start and end dates, but they're well into play as we go forward. So that the healthcare transit systems will be key drivers as we go forward. The risks are probably more on the commercial side and on the industrial side, but there's still a long list of projects that are proposed there to start or are underway. We just need to take a careful evaluation in terms of whether there's been any impact on major project scheduling type thing. So
that's great. Thank you. So I do want to dive a little deeper into the risks, but before we do that, Bill, have you got anything that you want to add to that?
No, I think there's certainly a very comprehensive overview. And as Bob said, I mean, we haven't yet heard of any major projects either being canceled or pushed out further. But we're still kind of in the infancy of this whole situation that we find ourselves in with the United States. And so until we see some additional clarity, we're likely to be looking at a period of considerable fluidity. But for now, it seems to be steady as she goes. And until, as I said, until we get a little bit more clarity from the United States and what our response might be, it's difficult to really project what the challenges might be on that front.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, so what I'm hearing is that there still is definitely some good news. I think that one of the really important areas that we're focusing on here is that the investment in our infrastructure related projects does remain stable. But I would like to take a moment to dive maybe a little bit deeper into the risk side of things. So, you talked a little bit about some of the risks. I'd like to know sort of some of the areas where some of our listeners could be exposed to a fair bit of risk. Even things like, are we expecting postponements, cancellations of projects, that sort of stuff. So what are you seeing from that perspective? And Bill, I'll kind of put it over to you first.
Sure. We haven't seen that yet. Obviously, we are in a situation with the United States where there have been the threat of tariffs, not only on aluminum and steel, but now also on the auto industry. And we're still not entirely clear on how that's going to roll out. Certainly, the president of the United States has made a number of statements about that, but then has also said that there may be specific carve-outs. So until we have a better sense of how those tariffs will be applied and what potential impact that might have on a number of the large investments that we were looking at here in the country, and what the Canadian response is going to be in terms of retaliatory tariffs, it's a bit of a challenge. Clearly, the auto industry is very concerned, and we are tracking a couple very large auto projects. We're also tracking some, there have been some challenges with the EV market in the United States. So again, these are all potential risks, but to date anyway, we haven't yet heard of any major projects being canceled. Although the pace at which we were expecting them to ramp up, that may change. And of course, supply chains are going to be a significant challenge. And that will be a major disruption to the industry if we start seeing rising costs, particularly for contractors that are already midway through a project. That introduces a whole new layer of complexity in terms of negotiations with the owner, making sure that the contractor doesn't actually bear the costs of these additional risks. And I think certainly the what we have been hearing, and Bob certainly spoke to this, a lot of the big major projects that we are tracking are institutional projects, and they're government projects. So our anticipation would be that if governments are going to be taking retaliatory action against the United States, that they would obviously be looking to help contractors offset those costs. So there are some significant risks, but at present, we haven't yet seen any major projects canceled or any major projects shifted out beyond the windows that we've been looking at.
Yeah, and I think that, when we take a look at automotive facilities and that sort of stuff, there's obviously the uncertainty there around, whether or not they're moving down to the States or staying in Ontario. I think right now it's reasonably stable at this point, but even looking into other projects around material cost, that's going to be a major consideration for people in terms of how they deal with those contracts, the contract language, and really kind of the owner's expectation around that sort of thing. Bob, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I guess the only other one to look at, that one we'll have to keep a close eye on, is sort of some changes in terms of population growth, where the federal government have, introduced lower targets in terms of immigrants and caps on number of non-permanent residents that carries over into the number of students coming in. Could have a carryover effect to previously planned post-secondary investments that we need to sort of track as well. But the other thing that sort of is a looming, any slower economic growth than we anticipated could have a carryover effect, because we were starting to hear anecdotally that some investors, developers were putting things on pause, wait and see attitude to see how things unflow. And as Bill mentioned, it's a very fluid market that we're in. So that could have some carryover effect into 2025. But I think what we may be tracking, and one thing that we'll be looking at closely, is how the schedules have been changing versus outright cancellations, the second part that we'll be looking at. And that's something we're going to be taking a close look at over the next several months.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Thank you.
And
so I guess
some of those schedule changes were really, it's a combination of factors. It's not just investment uncertainty. It's also been access to labor. Despite the fact that we have seen a bit of a decline on the residential side, the non-residential side remains incredibly busy, and accessing the right skill sets at the right time for each individual project remains a top of mind concern for almost every contractor across the province. In all regions, although we have seen a bit of a softening in the north, but all regions are busy. So the ability to be able to pull workers in from other regions to help supplement your workforce, that's becoming increasingly strained.
Yeah, and I want to jump into that a little bit more and maybe sort of just, I want to explore one other area first before we get there, but I think that's a really important point. So in staying with sort of the risk side of things, I know a lot of listeners, and I think it's justified, kind of their worry about, what do we have on the horizon? So one thing that I would like to look at is where do we see some of the opportunities where they might transition? So people that are engaged in areas that may start to slow a little bit, where could they potentially transition to ride out the uncertainty? Do you see any opportunities there where there's perhaps something like a boom or something like that that's being caused as a result of maybe some of what we're seeing to the south?
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, I look back to the Great Recession in 2008, and if we in fact do see some significant reductions in GDP as a result of the tariff war that we're in with the United States, and we can't find some sort of resolution to this. The What government did the last time was they turned to the construction industry as a way of stimulating economic growth. And I anticipate that that would likely be the path that they would follow again. There was a lot written about shovel-ready projects. My belief would be that in the event that we start to see a bit of a decline in GDP as a result of this tariff war with the United States, the governments will again double down on investments in the economy, into the infrastructure of the province, and in all likelihood, that will affect both the civil side, but also the institutional side, probably an acceleration of investment into a number of hospital and long-term care facilities, schools, school modernization, as well as post-secondary institutions. Again, it was demonstrated certainly during the Great Recession that the fastest way to bring the economy back from a situation where we were in decline was really these government investments. And it took us about 18 months to get back to a position where we were starting to see sustained growth coming out of that Great Recession. And I anticipate the governments will be looking to do the same thing should, again, the situation continue to devolve with the United States, although I'm still relatively optimistic that cooler heads will prevail and that we will find a path forward that will prevent any sort of significant disruptions between the two countries, trade between the two countries. Our economies are just so integrated that I'm fairly certain we will find a path forward. But there is obviously that concern right now, and if we do see that situation emerge, then my guess is governments will respond by continuing to invest in the economy and finding new ways to pump a little bit more money into construction to help stimulate growth.
Yeah, definitely. Let's hope that cooler heads do prevail with that. So I guess beyond, schools, hospitals, other infrastructure type projects, transit, that kind of stuff. Bob, do you see any other opportunities?
No, I think those are the core markets, as Bill sort of, like in terms of where we're seeing any significant growth. The commercial side, as I say, while there are risks, it's sort of more moderate growth, sustained levels of activity over the next while, across the province. But in terms of growth that we're seeing, and we have to put things in context as well, on the institutional side, lots of media is on the big, large projects, multi-billion-dollar projects, but there's a lot of investment layers below that, right across the board, whether it be long-term care facilities, hospital renovations, even smaller, I shouldn't say smaller hospitals, but the hospitals that might be in the $50 to $100 million range. So there's a fair amount of growth that we're seeing there in terms of the overall investment. On the industrial building side, obviously there are risks. I mean, there's a lots in the work. We see some projects that are changing through net zero configurations. Those may be opportunities there as well. The weaker market may be on the commercial side, but we'll see when we get past 2025. Much later in the outlook scenario, we do have that market growing at a much more significant rate as some of the other markets then start slowing as major projects, big scale major projects, wind down. But the level of investment remains fairly elevated, particularly on the institutional side.
Mhm.
So really, it's a matter of contractors staying fluid enough in terms of the types of the projects that they're taking on, bidding, that sort of stuff, to make sure that they can kind of go with the punches through this entire thing. So yeah. Okay, so I did want to come back quickly to the workforce capacity side of things. So there's been a fair bit of talk recently, even in terms of the government push around getting people into the skilled trades. So whether it's just a shortage or through natural attrition within the trades, does the current political climate mean that we might not need to worry about workforce capacity right now? And Bill, I'll start with you.
No, I think a lot of what we're seeing is really being driven by demographics. We've certainly seen governments, both at the provincial level and also at the federal level, not only investing into trade promotion, but providing direct supports to employers to encourage additional hiring. Because we still have a demographic challenge that we're going to have to deal with. 18% of the population is already over 65, and 19%, because we tend to focus a lot on the baby boomers, but Generation X isn't far behind. So 19% of the population is now sitting between the ages of 50 and 64. And when we look at those individuals that are under the age of 15 in the province, it's only 15% of the population. So it doesn't take a mathematician to figure out over the next 15 years, we're going to be seeing more people exiting the workforce than available to replace them. And that's going to create some real strain. In our latest forecast, we actually see growth across the 10-year period that we're tracking in the labor force. And when we combine demand growth with also retirements, we estimate that the industry is going to need to hire an additional 150,000 workers over the next 10 years. And despite the fact that we've been seeing some acceleration in training and workforce development, we still anticipate we're only going to see about 102,000 individuals added to the industry over that period of time. So we still anticipate we're going to be around 50,000 workers short. And that's going to require, again, an ongoing sustained effort on the part of governments, but also on the part of the industry to remain focused on labor force development, recruitment, mentoring, ensuring that that next generation workforce is receiving the proper mentoring, because it's not even if we could find body for body replacements, you're never going to see a direct replacement, because those individuals that are exiting the workforce are the most seasoned workers in the industry. And so bringing in a younger worker, it takes time for them to develop the experience and the knowledge necessary to be able to perform at the same level of an older worker that might be exiting the industry. So I think employers are going to have to get creative, trying to find a way to retain some of their older workers in more of a limited capacity, acting as a mentor, more in a training capacity for those that are interested, continuing to focus on labor force diversification, looking for opportunities to increase that workforce, particularly with groups that historically have been traditionally underrepresented in the industry, but also remaining very focused on labor force development, taking individuals that may get displaced from other industries, trying to draw them into construction. But the reality of our situation is that immigration is going to have to play a significant role as well. And we have been seeing some positive signs, both on the part of the federal government and also the provincial government, to try and create policies that enable the industry to be able to access some of the workers that they need. Just not in the numbers that we've been seeing or that we anticipate we're going to need, but it's certainly positive movement forward. And we hope to continue to see that progress with government, because we're going to need to work cooperatively with government. And certainly the Ontario construction industry has done a fantastic job working with the current provincial government to try and not only put in place programs that have enabled the industry to be more active in terms of recruitment and also trade promotion across the province. And that's the kind of effort that's going to need to be sustained over the next 10 years if we're going to avoid this gap of about 50,000 workers.
I'm glad you brought that up around immigration, because I think a lot of what we're seeing down in the the U.S. right now is a move very much away from that, which I think would put us in a really bad position if we were to go down that same path. Bob, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, and I guess we talked a little bit about the growth over to 2027 peak and then sort of sustained. While industry recedes over the next decade later, it's still well elevated. So the new demands are going to be there. And the real challenge that I always see is that all industries are facing the same aging demographic challenges. Mm-hmm. And so we are competing against every other sector, every other market segment out there to recruit people into the industry, train them, and then more importantly, retain them to maintain that long-term skilled workforce, which is really what we need and plan for over the next decade, which is really one of the big advantages of using a tool like BuildForce, is to see where those various pieces come together to come up with those target levels of how trends are unfolding.
And the last thing I would say on that is we only know what we know today. While we are seeing a very large volume of projects out there, we don't know what that world may look like 2 years from now, 3 years from now. We are certainly tracking a significant number of projects that extend over the life of our forecast, but there will be new projects added. And again, we only know what we know today. So my anticipation is that we're going to continue to see those numbers of that investment flow increase, and that we may see these pressures sustained right throughout the decade.
Yeah, so I guess really the message is don't take your foot off the gas. We still need to do this, but I also think it is a great time to sort of reinforce, when we look at that work in the trades, I mean, they're fabulous jobs. They pay well. There's great benefits. Retirement looks great after kind of the trade. So it's really trying to promote all aspects. So it's looking at it as a true career versus, a job, which I think in some cases traditionally it was sort of seen as just something that you walk into, but this is truly something where there is some professionalism behind it, and definitely career opportunities. So yeah, thank you. So
it's absolutely true, Brian, because and part of our challenge in bringing newcomers into this industry is that many of them have perceptions of construction that are not relevant to the Canadian situation. And they bring those biases, which has only increased some of the challenges that we faced in terms of trying to recruit newcomers into this industry. And that's something that we're going to have to continue to stay on guard anyway, and continue to work with settlement organizations and a variety of other key stakeholders to make sure we get that information out there, because as we see a larger and larger share of the overall workforce being made up by newcomers, which is again consistent with the demographic situation we find ourselves in, we're going to have to continue to fight for our share of those individuals. Otherwise, we're going to see the challenges that we have today basically turn into chronic labor shortages moving forward.
Absolutely. And maybe if I just add to that, one of the challenges always is we see the near-term risks, but we also must plan beyond the near-term risks, whether it be over the medium term or long term. And that's tough sometimes because you're feeling the pinch now in some market segments, but we have to look at the bigger picture from an industry-wide to keep planning accordingly.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think preparation is key. When we take a look at these sorts of things, it's you've got to be ready. We have to have the ability to be able to move quickly to build these projects. So it's critically important. And with that, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for coming to the podcast. So despite, I guess, really kind of the roller coaster that we feel like we're on, I think it's clear that the investment patterns and the need to improve and expand our infrastructure will not change. So regardless of the decisions that the U.S. makes, we do have some of that solid foundation in terms of some of those infrastructure projects that we can look to, the engineering type projects and that sort of stuff to help sustain the industry. So, although I think we have to acknowledge that some of the ICI segments will slow, there are some opportunities out there that may be a logical transition for some people who are affected by that slowing of the economy. So with that, I'd like to thank both Bill Ferreira and Bob Collins for the time today on OCS Talks. For more information on today's podcast and resources from the Ontario Construction Secretariat, visit our website at iciconstruction.com, and make sure to also subscribe and follow us on all our social media channels to stay up to date with everything we have going on. Thank you for your time.
Ontario Construction Secretariat. Knowledge to build on. Visit iciconstruction.com to learn more.